The art and science, it sounds rather grandiose, doesn't it? The art and science of implementing school improvement. The reason I've called this session that is that it's sort of based on this idea of implementation science. And that's this phrase that we're going to be talking about today. And it's sort of that in itself is a bit grand, and it's not really a science that we're talking about. It's sort of a science, but it's also a bit blurry around the edges, you know. And so I refer to it as the art and science of implementing school improvement. Hello, Jonathan Sharples. Nice to see you with a strong. I feel like I'm having my homework marked here. Jonathan is the author of the EEF's very excellent guide to implementation. So, quick bit of housekeeping. You're all being very well behaved so far. Please, can you keep your mics off unless you're asked to unmute, and I may well do that. Please light up the chat box. Continue to make comments in there if any questions occur to you as we're progressing through the webinar. Please type them away. If you can write the word question in capital letters, that will really help me to scroll, because I don't have a beautiful or even a non-beautiful assistant to help me with the fielding questions. So if you write the word question in capital letters, then that'll help me to scan for the questions. But please feel free to comment. And if you want to chip in at any time, the little raise hand icon at the bottom of the Zoom screen, that'll appear on the right-hand side of my screen. And if you want to chip in, if you want to ask a question verbally at any time, please feel free to use that, and I will invite you into the conversation at a suitable moment. Okay. So that's that. Here's the plan for this session. I'm going to do a bit of an introduction. What is implementation science, and why is it, to my mind, the most important thing that we really need to be thinking about in education and indeed more widely? We'll maybe get onto that later on. I'm going to do a quick overview of this toolkit that I've created over the last few years. And I'm going to pick out 4 key elements. There's one about choosing your focus, like what sorts of things does this approach lend itself to? This really the big idea that drives this whole approach, the idea of a vertical slice team. And then I'll touch briefly on monitoring and evaluation and something called pivot or persevere meetings, because that's sort of like the structural backbone of the program, if you like, but there's loads more in it. And so at that point, we'll open this up, and I've sort of hyperlinked this menu slide. So if people can ask about whichever aspect of this toolkit you want to know more about, and then all being well, I'll click on that thing and it'll take us to that part of the toolkit, and we'll talk about that thing. So that's an interactive part of this webinar, and there'll be a couple of other stopping off points and opportunities for you to reflect and think about how all this applies to you and your setting. Number 4, I've got a bit of a head scratcher at the moment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on helping me name stuff. I'll explain more about that later on. And lastly, if there's time, we'll do some Q&A. And we've said that this thing will go till 5:30, but I'm happy to stay on longer if people want to hang around and chat. I would literally talk about this till the cows come home. I find it endlessly fascinating. So I'm going to start with a question. Whenever I talk to people in schools or elsewhere about implementation science stuff, I often start with this question, and I'd like you to type a number, if you will, into the chat window. If you had to just take a gut instinct, you know, if you had to pluck a number out of the air, if you look back over your career, what proportion, roughly, of school improvement initiatives would you say lead to improved pupil outcomes? If you had to put a number on it, what would that number be? I'll give you a couple of minutes to think. Wow, 1, Jeff. 5. Good point, Steve. We'll come on to that. 120, less than a quarter, consistently low. Wow, 15, 20, 10-ish. Yeah, it does depend on how it's measured. Absolutely. Between 10 and 60. Becky, how nice to see you. You must have worked in some very effective institutions with a 60% hit rate. Yeah, it's low, isn't it? It's very low. Thank you for summing that up, Manjit. It's very low. And with remarkable consistency, whenever I ask this question, it nearly always comes back in the sort of 5 to 20% range, just almost exactly as happened here. Um, and that's not good, clearly, right? Like just already, that's like an 80 to 95% failure rate. But now we're going to tighten the criteria a little. So I'm going to ask you the same question, but I want you to think about how many of you, how many school improvement initiatives meet these three criteria. So they lead to demonstrable gains in pupil outcomes, for which you have, fairly compelling evidence. Secondly, that you've got a strong sense of causation, that you've got a fairly strong sense of what it is that you did, school improvement initiative X or Y or Z, that led to those improved outcomes. And thirdly, those improvements were sustained over several years. So I'm asking you the same question again. Does that make you revise your figure? Type in a new figure or the same figure if you're going to stick to the same one? So we're ranging from 0 to 5% so far. Close to 0, Guy, thank you. Yeah, causation is a slippery fish, Tracy. You're dead right. It's hard. That's interesting, Jonathan. I'm going to look at that. So Jonathan's saying out of 200 EEF evaluations, he would say 5 to 10. So that's like sort of 2 to 5% meet those criteria. Interesting, isn't it? Um, and so this is a problem. There's a low success rate of change initiatives, and as somebody just said a minute ago, it's hard to find out, right? It's actually impossible. There's no way to find out the actual answer to that question because lots of people don't publish detailed records of things that don't work, essentially. And I think we get a bit of a positive bias from the research literature, so-called file drawer syndrome, where people stick negative findings in the file drawer rather than publishing them. But we can glean some evidence from experts in change management, from the available research evidence, and from teacher surveys. So briefly, we'll look at some of those areas of evidence. So this is a chap called John Cotter, who many of you may have heard of. If any of you have done a school leadership program, you may have heard of his 8-step change process, where step 1 is create a sense of urgency. And in 2008, Cotter wrote a book called A Sense of Urgency, in which he wrote, from years of study, I estimate that more than 70% of needed change either fails to be launched, even though some people clearly see the need, fails to be completed, even though some people exhaust themselves trying, or finishes over budget, late, and with initial aspirations unmet. And he does make clear there that that's an estimate, right? It's his gut feeling, but this is based on his having worked in this field for decades with schools and with other large organizations. And this figure of 70% comes up a lot. There is one very influential paper that was published in the Harvard Business Review 20 years ago now, Beer and Noria, who wrote that here's the brutal fact: 70% of all change initiatives fail. And both Potter and Beer and Noria were talking about essentially businesses. They weren't really talking about schools. So this sort of gives us a general background reading. And this figure is contested. Some people think it's higher. Some people think it's lower, as you would expect. Everything is contested, isn't it, these days? And here's the thing that Jonathan mentioned earlier. So I did a quick sort of tally the other day. There's been on the EF website, as many of you will know, the Education Endowment Foundation has carried out lots of these very large scale, usually using a randomized controlled trial study design. And there's 184 projects that have been completed on the site to date. And there's 45, I think, that are still underway. And these are so-called like high potential projects. So these have been identified. They're pre-selected to be projects that the EF deems to have high potential. And of that 184, 134 had either no impact or negative impact, or actually like sort of made things worse or performed worse than the control group. which gives us that familiar figure of 70%-ish. And then interestingly, what Jonathan just said, if you apply those more stringent criteria, sustained over time, evidence of causation and so on, that number would shrink even further. And to try and get a sense of this, I did a Twitter poll a little while ago now, where I asked that same question that I asked to all of you earlier today, and around about half of the respondents put it at 0 to 10%. It was very similar to the answers that you gave earlier. And then you could argue that this was an unfair question because the intervals aren't evenly spaced. And so I did the same question a few weeks later with evenly spaced intervals. And again, we saw this exactly the same pattern. 75% of people putting it at less than 25% success rate. And so we're seeing a very sort of consistent pattern here that like everybody seems to agree, really, from experts in change management, from what we can glean from the research literature and from teacher surveys. We have this very low success rate. And this leads to a very problematic phenomenon, which I think everybody will be quite familiar with, this condition that goes by many names: initiative-itis, or innovation fatigue, or fatigue. I did a thing a while ago on Twitter where I asked people to give all their names for it, and fatigue came through there. Or this too shall pass syndrome, this phrase that teachers sort of mutter under their breath as the latest wheeze is unveiled. This too shall pass, just like keep your head down, just this will pass, just like all the other ones did. And people have been commenting in the chat box there about how things turn over so quickly, the quality of the leadership, but also the consistency of the leadership from the top on down. Like the average in this country, the average cabinet minister is in post for 1.3 years. And it's not that different in schools. If you look at the people who are sort of responsible for behavior 1 year, and then often they rotate around in secondary schools, certainly. So they're doing attendance or curriculum the next year and assessment the following year. And they sort of rotate around a little bit like cabinet ministers do. And we know that it takes like 3 to 5 years to bed in lasting positive change. But the people at the top are rarely in post for 3 to 5 years to do that hard grind. It's easy to launch a thing, isn't it? A lovely shiny new thing. We'll get a lunch and a logo and put some sandwiches out. But to grind it through and to see that thing through over 3 to 5 year period is less fun. And people often sort of move on to the next thing. And so we have this problem, and just to get a sense of the scale of the problem, there's a little sort of back of the envelope calculation that I did a while ago. This is a rough estimate, but say the average change initiative takes about 10 hours per person across a school year to attend some training, to do something different, and then to report back on it in some way, right? It's a rough estimate, 10 hours per person. And to keep the numbers simple, let's say there's an average of 100 people in a school, like teachers, support staff, what have you. School leaders, and you might say, well, that's a bit high, and that's probably is a bit high, but it's just to keep the numbers fine. But we'll adjust the numbers again later on. So there's about 32,000 schools in the UK, and so if you times that by 1,000 hours per school, then that gives you 32 million hours that we spend implementing change initiatives at a rate of 1 per school, which is probably a conservative estimate. And so if we take a 20% success rate, which looks like it might be on the generous side, that means that as a nation, we spend 25 million hours every year implementing school improvement initiatives that don't actually improve anything in a meaningful or lasting way. And if you scale this up across the planet, it's estimated that there are around 5 million schools in the world. That's 5 billion hours. And again, 20% success rate, that gives us a wastage rate of 4 billion hours spent implementing change ineffectively across the planet. And that is, that's an unbelievable, like if you string together 4 billion hours, one after the other, that adds up to 450,000 years, right? It's like a geological amount of time that we are wasting across the planet every year implementing school improvement initiatives that don't really improve anything. And there's such a massive problem, because like essentially we're going to look at the implementation equation shortly. When you are implementing something, there's essentially what you're doing, and then there's how well you're doing it. And generally the what you know, whatever it is that they're doing or what they're trying to achieve is worthy, right? They're trying to improve reading or love of reading, or to improve mental health and well-being, or to improve teacher retention, or whatever it might be. It's just that it's often the how, it's the implementation piece that's letting us down. And if you just imagine, like, if we could get that success rate up to 80% or 50%, or even just to 30%, if you think about like the impact that that could have across the planet, if we can figure out how to implement change effectively at scale, the impact that we could have on those reading outcomes, on mental health, on teacher retention, on whatever it is that you're trying to do, is sort of astonishing, isn't it? Like, so how can we figure out how to implement change effectively at scale, is this question that has been sort of burning inside me for the last 8 years or so. And I actually know exactly how long it is, because I found the flyer recently. 8 years ago, on the 28th of July 2014, I was in university. I was halfway through my PhD at the time, and this conference was on that day, implementation science. And I don't think I intended to go. I just happened to be in uni on that day. And so I went and stuck my head in the door. And my goodness, I'm really glad that I did. It absolutely was just a jaw-dropping day for me. And so the keynote speaker that day was someone called Barbara Kelly, who's a psychologist based up at Strathclyde University. And she started her keynote saying, implementation science is remarkable for 2 reasons. Number one, basically nobody's heard of it. And number two, we all need this like ASAP. And so she had my attention right from the outset. And I went on a journey essentially that day and started reading. And in particular, I mean, so what actually happened was I got really interested in implementation science. But as I say, I was halfway through my PhD, and I sort of made a promise to myself, once I've finished my PhD, I'm going to turn my attention to this more fully. And that's exactly what happened. And so I started reading everything that I could about implementation science and the change management literature more widely in business, in education, and elsewhere. And so what I found was, so implementation science is a health discipline, essentially. There's a journal, the Implementation Science Journal. It was launched in 2006. So as academic fields of study go, it's basically, you know, barely out of short pants. And in the first episode, the first journal, the first edition of that journal, the editors Eccles and Mittman described it as the scientific study of methods to promote the systematic uptake of research findings and other evidence-based practices into routine practice. I think that word routine is really key here, and hence to improve the quality and effectiveness of health services and care. And essentially what they're saying there is, we know how to improve outcomes. We know what best practice is. It's just that it's not happening routinely. And we need to, that's essentially the nut that the implementation science is trying to crack. And one question that this is mind-blowing, that like, one question that these researchers have wanted to know is, like, to what extent is this happening? To what extent is what we know to be evidence-informed, best practice, gold standard practice, to what extent is this actually happening out in the world? And as this has been looked at across a wide range of health disciplines, wide range of hospitals and healthcare centers. And they find that on average, it takes, this is just such a staggering statistic, it takes 17 years for a piece of evidence-informed gold standard practice to achieve 14% coverage or uptake, if you like, across the healthcare system as a whole, which is unbelievable, isn't it? It's like they're both bad numbers. 14%, 17 years. And one thing that there's lots of things that implementation scientists have found, but one thing that I have really just like found a hugely powerful thing is that they start to use this idea of a vertical slice team. And so instead of just doing everything in a top-down way, which is how things are normally done, right? Politics, hospitals, schools are all run by a small number of people who sit at the top, senior clinicians in hospitals and healthcare centers, who make decisions on everybody else's behalf. Likewise, school leaders, often likewise, you know, politicians, and then they just sort of tell everybody what's going to happen now. And so, and that's a huge part of the problem. I could talk about problems with top-down change all day long, and maybe we'll talk about that later. But so instead of that, they use this vertical slice approach where you take a cross section through the community, through the organization, and you get representatives of different types of people sitting around the decision-making table together, different stakeholder groups, if you like. Although I recently discovered that stakeholders got some unpleasant colonial connotations, so I try not to use that word. So that you're looking at this problem from multiple perspectives, and then you write and then execute a really detailed implementation plan, as I say, often over like a 3 to 5 year period. And so it's really important to understand that this is not just a consultation exercise. And that's where people often go wrong, I think. They sort of see the need for consultation, but then it just defaults, snaps back to being top down. So this team essentially becomes like the executive tasked with overseeing this particular policy. And so it's not top down change, but it's not bottom up either. It's like people at all levels of the organization working in harmony towards a common goal. And we find that when you implement change in this way, you can achieve 80% coverage within 3 years. And these statistics come from a range of studies, but it was summarized. There's a brilliant book that was recently published by Dean Fixon. I think it's called Implementation Science Now or something like that, with Karen Blaise and other people who've been, working in this field for decades. And so this stuff stands up. And that's a bit more like it, right? 80% in 3 years is a lot more like it, in fact. And just to give you an example of what this looks like in practice, because it might seem a bit abstract, a few years ago in the Cincinnati Children's Hospital, the medics there became very concerned about the very high levels of hospital admissions due to asthma, right? And so trying to get to the root of this problem, they assembled a vertical slice team and included clinicians from the hospital, but also included like school nurses, pharmacists, asthma patients themselves and their families. So they were looking at this problem from every possible angle. And the school nurses said, kids are forgetful. They're always leaving their medication at home, their Ventolin, right? And so they made sure that they always had asthma medication available in schools. And the pharmacists said people often don't even pick up their prescriptions because they work long hours or they don't have a car. And so they started delivering the medication to people's homes. And the patients themselves and their families often said, my landlord won't do anything about the damp and mold in my home, a very live issue in this country currently. And so they provided legal aid to take on the landlords. And so you can see that just like wherever they found a problem, they fixed it. And you wouldn't have come up with those problems if you were sitting around, brainstorming ideas. You sort of have to go out and talk to people and bring them into the conversation. And the outcomes were astonishing. So within 5 years of assembling this team and doing this piece of work, the hospital admissions due to asthma had reduced by more than half. In the subsequent 3 years, the readmission rate reduced by half again. It's led to a massive reduction in school days missed, huge reduction in work days missed due to parents having to look after their kids, massive financial savings for the hospital. This is what you might call a win-win, win-win-win, right? It's like this, it's ridiculous how effective this way of working is. But this is still very much the exception rather than the rule, because essentially we just keep defaulting to this top-down thing. And so I read as much as I could about implementation science. Vertical slice teams is one part of it, but there's lots more, as you can see. So this is this toolkit that I've created. And as you can see, it comes in 3 parts: preparing the ground, implementation planning, and then making it happen. And there's lots in here. We're going to look at different aspects of this toolkit today, but it usually takes about 20 to 25 hours to work through this whole thing and to write a really robust plan. So obviously we've got an hour left today, so we can scratch the surface of it and hopefully give you a sense of what's in this thing. But, we haven't got 25 hours. And so, as you can see, most of the meat of this idea is in this middle section, implementation planning, where you assemble a vertical slice team, and then you work your way through all of these ideas, and you write this very robust plan in chapter 18 here, the implementation plan. And then you pause, you do a thing called a pre-mortem, which actually Guy Claxton's on the call. I think I got that from one of your books, the pre-mortem. Where you anticipate problems before they've happened, right? And it's a brilliant exercise that, and teachers are very good at coming up with a very long list of reasons why something is not going to work because they've seen it happen so many times. But then you go, right, well, it's not happened yet, right? Those problems haven't happened yet. And so to what extent can we fix those things or make contingencies in advance? And then you move into the making it happen phase. And so we piloted. Mark Quinn's on the call as well. So 4 years ago, roughly, I think, when I was working with Mark and others at in the Center for Educational Leadership at the Institute of Education, we made a very sort of proto version of this. There was only 10 things in it at the time. And we ran a pilot study in a school, and Mark will confirm this. This is like 6 months later, we went and visited this school, and it was just staggering how it was like amazing. Like, not only had it really, really helped this policy that they were working on to become really effective, when it had been showing early signs of maybe it wasn't going to, maybe it looked like it was going to run aground a bit. Thank you, Mark. But also, they'd really taken on board the implementation science piece, and they trained up their middle leaders in it, and they were using it they'd assembled a vertical slice to look at their race and relations and equalities policy. And so it was amazing. And we thought, we're onto something here. And since then, I've now delivered this training to thousands of schools all over the world, mostly remotely. We do it face-to-face as well. And the feedback is honestly unbelievable. And I'll just share with you just some of the examples of 3 quotes. I don't want to toot my own horn too much, but it's not, this is implementation science's horn that we're tooting here. So Elaine, who was one of the senior leaders who was in that pilot study, said that this program has been the making of her as a leader, and that it's something that she now takes with her and applies to everything that she does. Which is, like we were used to getting good feedback for the programs we ran at UCL, and it's an amazing center, but I'm not used to seeing feedback like that. That's something else. The head teacher of a school where I did this training with the whole of their senior team, Al Kennedy, said, this was when I caught up with him a couple of weeks later, the senior team and I are really energized now, much more confident about what we can do differently as a school. This training is so valuable because it's something that we're doing all the time, but we've never really been trained in it. And that's the thing, right? Like, I've been, part of my role at UCL was to facilitate the MPQs, the leadership qualifications that school leaders do at various levels. And there's a bit of stuff on implementation in there. And in the new MPQs, there's a bit more stuff in implementation. But it's clearly not enough because, look at the low success rate that we saw earlier. And another senior leader, Sarah, at that same school, said, I really wish that I'd done this training before I embarked on my current project. Goodness me, she said, I'd be doing things differently if I had had this learning first. And that's something that I hear all the time from people who do this training. They often say, like, I wish I'd known this stuff 20 years ago, because, things would have been very different. And so I created an online course because I found that, that there's, first of all, there's a lot of demand for this. But also, whenever I deliver this training, I basically say the same stuff. The input is the same. The problems that we're applying these ideas to are different in each setting, but the material is pretty generic. And so I've made an online course over the last 18 months or so. And honestly, it's one of the hardest things I've ever done. It nearly broke me. But it's done now, and it's out there, and people are buying it and enjoying it. And so there's 4 elements to it. There's 23 videos. So there's one for each of those chapters that I showed you a moment ago. And that adds up to roughly nearly 5 hours of viewing time. So as you can see, it's a fairly substantial program. There's a playbook. So as you work your way through this program, there's a playbook, which is about 180 pages, which probably sounds a bit daunting, but it's basically just like, most of it is like just screen grabs of the slides from the video, so that people don't have to make tons of notes with like the key information from each chapter. And then after each chapter, there's also a bunch of activities to help you to apply these ideas to your setting. There's an implementation planning template. which is customizable, which is about 30 pages, which again probably sounds like a lot, but it's designed so that there's just one idea on each page. So it's not like this overwhelming document. If you really condensed it down, it would probably fit into about 8 pages or something. So it's not massive. But this, some schools that I've been working with are sort of using these in place of school improvement plans to have an implementation plan instead. And the fourth element is that there's a mighty network, an online community, so that people can connect with other people who are working on similar problems and sort of share ideas and support one another and so on. And it's in its early days of finding its feet, the mighty network. But I've been a bit distracted this year with a few other projects, but we're going to really put rocket boosters under this in the new year. And it's completed ideally by a vertical slice team. So you assemble a vertical slice team looking at a particular school improvement initiative, and you work that through. So it's not a course that you do in the abstract. It's like the way that you learn about implementation is by actually doing an implementation project. And it usually takes, as I say, roughly sort of 24 hours. And people generally split that into sort of 8 3-hour sessions or 12 2-hour sessions. And that's all that you need to go through the whole toolkit, to work your way through that playbook, to write this really robust implementation plan and to convert it into a project management plan, which we'll maybe get onto later. So fairly substantial in terms of time, but you can't do it. There's no shortcuts here. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So this toolkit, there's a number of different ideas in here, and some of them, like vertical slice teams, backward design, tight but loose, they're basically like design principles, right? They're sort of like just how to design this process. Other things like choosing your focus, mapping the journey, the pre-mortem that I mentioned earlier, are more just like activities that you work your way through, really. But each of these things like shines a really valuable light on this complex process of change that we're working our way through. And they're all really important. And just to explain why that is, people often talk about this idea that I mentioned earlier, the implementation equation, where you've got what you're doing and how well you're doing it. And you can think of it as like a multiplication sum, if you like. What times how equals improved outcomes, or what times how equals wow, if you like, as in like, wow, this one actually worked. And the most important thing in this equation is the multiplication sign, because if either the what or the how amounts to 0, as in if either the what or how is less than effective, then the outcomes will likely be 0 also. And the reason, if you go back to this menu slide, you can imagine this as like a more elaborate version of that equation, where there's a little multiplication sign between each of these things. And it might be that you do a really good job of implementing a change initiative, but if you overlook one aspect of this, if you overlook the importance of habit change, for example, or communications planning, or if you don't get your head around project management or pivot or persevere meetings, or whatever it might be, then this whole thing might amount to 0 also. And so you can't really take any shortcuts. You can't just like pick 5 of these ideas and go for it. I don't think that you can do that and expect to have a positive outcome. You have to go through this whole process. But once you've been through it the first time, then it's a lot easier and quicker, the second and third and fourth time. So it's sort of front loaded. Okay. So I've been chatting for a little while now, and so I'm going to pause for a moment and just give you some time to digest and to stick something into the chat box, and I'll read back through some of your comments and questions so far. What difference would you most like to make at the moment, and for whom? Like if you're on this call, I imagine that you're interested in implementing change. It could be in your own life, could be outside of a formal work setting. But what's the difference that you would most like to make, and for whom? I'll just give you a couple of minutes to reflect on that. That's an interesting point, Andy. When we come on to the monitoring and evaluation piece, we'll look at that. I think that you're right. I think that there is often an overemphasis on quantifying things. That's interesting, Bethan. The difference between what is taught and what is learned. Yeah, thank you. And there's some really interesting comments further up as well. I think you're right, Tony. It does start with leaders. There's one of the chapters is called the role of leaders. Like, this is not an anti-leadership thing. That whole idea of the vertical slice team, leaders continue to play a really important part in this role, and it doesn't lend itself to all leadership styles. You know, there's a like, some leaders will not like the idea of devolving responsibility and some power to this vertical slice team. Like, for some people, that would yeah, not work. Yeah, so Guy asked about the book. There is a book on its way early in the new year, I'm hoping. It's coming along quite nicely, actually. So, right, let's move on. Please continue to stick stuff in the chat box. So here's this menu slide again, and I'm going to pick out four for the backbone of this program, if you like, and then we will open this up to allow you to interrogate the toolkit a bit and to ask questions about whichever bits you are interested in. So we'll start with choosing your focus. How do you decide what's a good thing to implement using this approach? And so I'm sure that you've probably seen this sort of an idea before. I often find it quite useful that a priority matrix where you've sort of got impact up one axis and effort up the other. And this sort of breaks into four quadrants where you've got low effort, high impact stuff. That would be a quick win, right? So something like, I remember once at a school that I worked at, there was food everywhere all the time. And just overnight, they implemented a change initiative, and it was like you were only allowed to eat in the canteen. And overnight, the litter problem just went away. It was amazing. And so that would be a quick win. Or something outside of education, like the smoking ban. There was that introduced in this country 15 years or so ago. Pretty easy to implement once it was decided. Huge impact on public health. Brilliant. So it doesn't lend itself to that quick win type stuff. Obviously, low priorities and thankless tasks are not of interest here. And so it's high effort, high impact stuff. And essentially that means that things that are whole school, something that affects many different types of people within the school, and something that's substantial, something that's going to take like a 3 to 5 year period to really bed in. And that doesn't mean that you don't start seeing gains straight away. You absolutely do, but you have to have your eye on that 3 to 5 year period. And so here are some examples of the kinds of initiatives that people have implemented using this toolkit. So focusing on things like behavior, curriculum, pedagogy, PD, improving outcomes, system stuff. I'll just give you a moment to glance across the screen. So you get the idea, like big, meaty, juicy stuff, really. And so when you're thinking about how to identify an area of focus, I often suggest that you start with looking at your existing school improvement planning and create a short list of things that you would put in that upper right-hand quadrant, high effort, high impact stuff. And then secondly, collate and review evidence to determine which of those options should be prioritized. Looking at three areas there, looking at external research evidence, looking at in-school data, and then perhaps doing some sort of data collection, surveys or focus groups with different groups of people. and then mapping your options against your school values and their opposites. We haven't got time to go into this now, but there's a brilliant activity in the toolkit about values mapping, where you because you often say like, oh, at our school, we want our kids to be kind and thoughtful and resilient and so on. And it sounds like motherhood and apple pie. And you're like, okay, so what does the opposite of those things look like? You know, what's the opposite of kindness? What's the opposite of resilience? What are we trying to work away from here? And that exercise really helps you to get a handle on values, which can often just be a bit woolly. So we do this values mapping exercise, and then you figure out which is the least bad option. And that idea of least bad is something that I use all the time in my thinking. I find it very useful, so that you're not trying to do the optimal thing or the ultimate thing. You're just trying to work your way towards the least bad formulation, which is basically the same thing, but it just feels more doable, you know. I don't know, maybe that's an English sensibility. Anyway, the next one, the vertical slice team, the big idea that drives this whole approach. So you take a cross section through the organization, as I say, and there's a bunch of examples of different types of people. It really depends on the change initiative that you're doing as to who would be in the team. But it's a really good idea to have a cross section of different phases if you're at primary, early years, key stage 1, 2, and different subjects or faculties if you're at secondary, and potentially including kids, parents, you know, ancillary staff, whoever it is who's got a valuable perspective on whatever it is that you're trying to do. The size of the team really depends on the size of the school. Obviously, you know, if you're in a very small one-form entry primary school, you often can't really get more than 2 or 3 people off timetable at any one time. And so, you know, three or 4 people I've worked with in very effective ways. In a very large secondary school, I've worked with teams of about 12, but that's probably a bit on the big side. Usually it's sort of around about 6 in a primary school and sort of 8 to 10 in a secondary, something like that. And I really recommend that you handpick the team. That this is not, you don't just allow people to self-select, you allow people to apply, but you want to be very careful about how you appoint people to this team based on a range of experiences and views, and also on this idea of demonstrable readiness, right? So that then I was talking with Becky about this the other day, people who are like serial yesers, she used that phrase. So people who are willing, but also able and have the capacity and are on top of their other stuff, right? They're not really struggling with basic aspects of lesson planning, and you're asking them to take on this additional things. So ready, willing, and able, essentially. And we could talk about this later if you like. People are often interested to know about, like, you know, should you have dissenting voices in the team? And I think that the answer to that is it depends. You know, we could talk about that later on. It depends on the people. You know the people better than I do. You don't want somebody who's just going to be awkward for the sake of being awkward. But, you know, you do want to have robust discussions in this team. And I'll talk about that more in a moment. And essentially, this vertical slice team works their way through this toolkit together. If they do the online course, the videos and the playbook, they write a very detailed plan, and you can do that either by committee, where everybody's involved in every decision, or you can split up into teams and different people work on different bits of the plan, which, you know, speeds up the process a little. And then you work to implement the plan over time. So it's, like I say, it's not just a planning thing. They're actually involved in the execution over time with different roles for different group members. Some of them are on communications, some of them are on monitoring and evaluation, and so on. And that's usually coordinated by a senior leader within the team. And then you scribe and publish any minutes. And so it's really important that this operates as a glass box, because often senior teams, they operate as a black box, right? They have meetings, senior leaders, they don't publish the minutes of those meetings. People don't get to find out what happens in those meetings or what the reasoning is behind decisions that are made. They just sort of make decisions, and then people are told, and the why is missing. And so we want to counter that and to operate as a glass box where we can see out of this vertical slice team, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but also people can see in, so that they can see that they are represented, they can see what the decision making is. And you don't have to, you know, tell everybody about everything that happens, but you just, you know, whenever there's been a meeting, say, you store the minutes in a shared area of the drive or what have you, and you just alert people and say, if you're interested to find out what we're doing, you know, here it is. So that there's transparency in this process. And we go through a set of ground rules, because one of the problems that we have with top-down change is the problem of groupthink, right? Where you have only like-minded people, when you have only school leaders making decisions, or only cabinet ministers making decisions, you know, you often get bad decision making because they're not looking at this problem from multiple perspectives, like those medics were at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And so we've come up with a set of ground rules for this team where everyone's an equal member of the team, teaching assistants and head teachers alike around this table. Everybody's an equal member of this team, equally responsible for writing and also for executing aspects of this plan over time. Making sure that all relevant information is shared, especially inconvenient information. You know, that phenomenon where people, it's essentially groupthink in a nutshell, where people think that their boss is making a mistake or an error of judgment, but they don't want to contradict their boss because it would be awkward to do so, and it's probably not the best career move. And so they bite their tongue, which is perfectly understandable, but then you get bad decision making. And so we want to make sure that does not happen. So we have robust conversations around this table. All relevant information is shared, especially if it's in conflict with other people. I'm reading a brilliant book at the moment called How to Disagree by Ian Leslie. And some of the ideas in that book are fantastic. I'm going to incorporate those into this. Team members should feel free within this forum to air their honest views without fear of repercussion. And likewise, they should be prepared to have their own views challenged where appropriate. And bearing in mind that we're trying to actually get stuff done here, so we try to negotiate and compromise and work towards agreement where possible. And when we're having these robust conversations, which often, you know, involves naming people by name, pupils or colleagues, the usual clause around confidentiality arises. And so you come up with a set of ground rules for how this team works together. And honestly, when you see this in practice, you just think, why does this not happen in every meeting? Like, it's beautiful to see it in action and to see people realizing that their voices are valued here. Like, it's transformational. It's an absolutely incredible thing to see. And one of the first activities that we do is this idea of 5-minute interviews. So you come up with, let's say you're doing like a feedback initiative, right? And so you say, so what do you think about this feedback initiative? Do you agree that this is a priority for the school at this point in time? Or do you think, actually, we need to get on top of behavior first or something else, right? What concerns do you have about this feedback initiative? What questions or ideas do you have, and so on? So you come up with a bunch of questions, and then each member of the vertical slice team goes away and talks to other people like them in the organization for a 5-minute chat. And it's important that it's face-to-face and that it's not just a survey. And so they ask them those 5 questions. So the TA goes and talks to other teaching assistants, the middle leader talks to other middle leaders, and so on. And then the next time the vertical slice team meets, they feed that information back in an anonymized way, and they can roll in their own views and opinions in with this anonymized feedback. And so it's another way of having really robust conversations. And when we ran this in this pilot study at UCL Academy, one of the senior leaders said, like, once you've implemented change in this way, there's no going back, because you really know what the school is thinking. Like, you really like have this sense, you know, that sort of like that the idea that the Queen used to think that the world was made of paint, right? Because everyone like paints everywhere that she goes. And it's like that idea that you know, you have this sort of this bubble effect as a senior leader, that people behave differently around you. And so it bursts that bubble open and allows you to really see what's going on. And to what Julia Galaf, is she called, calls a scout mindset, right? Like having a really accurate read of the landscape. And that's what this stuff allows you to do. Very, very powerful. Has anyone got any questions on? Feel free to unmute and just ask if you want, before we move on to monitoring and evaluation, because I know I've been talking a lot.
Hello, James. Nika here from,
Hi, Nika.
from Ireland. Hello. I think I attended a presentation by you, I think a year ago or something. And in under implementation planning, you had there, like originally, stages of concern, levels of use, if I'm not mistaken, or
that's right. Similar. Yeah, that's in that thing, the implementation bridge. Yeah.
So is it still present in a different form, or? Yeah,
it is. I call it a slightly different name. So that's Hall and Hoard's work on, they call it CBAM or KBAM, the concerns-based adoption model. Yeah, I call it the implementation bridge because it's just nicer. I like metaphors. But yeah, it's absolutely in there, and it's amazing, that stuff. Thank you. Yeah, it is very much still in the toolkit.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks,
anyone else?
Thanks. James.
No worries. Nice to see you. let's move on. If we get time, let's look at that implementation bridge later, because as Nika said, it's really, really powerful stuff. Okay, so let's look at monitoring and evaluation. There's 4 sort of foundational ideas that underpin this aspect of the toolkit. One being that any school improvement initiative is a complex intervention with several moving parts, right? And so there's a chapter earlier on called building your intervention, and it's like building a brick wall. You're like, what are the different elements within this thing? It's not just a single variable intervention. You can always break it down into several parts. Sorry, this slide's going to animate in a slightly annoying way. Secondly, in order to evaluate a school improvement initiative effectively, you therefore need to evaluate each element of that complex intervention. If you've got any rotten bricks in your wall, you need to pop those out and stick a good one in. And so the complex intervention defines how we think about monitoring and evaluation. It's important to collect data and to write research questions at 3 levels. Baseline, what's it like before you start? Impact, what's it like after you've tried to make things better? And also side effects. If any of you have read that book, What Works May Hurt, by Yong Zhao, the importance of collecting information on side effects, what are the unintended consequences of what we're doing here, is super useful, important question to ask. And finally, the aim of monitoring and evaluation is to inform decision-making and resourcing throughout the implementation period. And this really links to the next idea I'll talk about, pivot or persevere meetings, where you're collecting data in an ongoing way from day one on each of the aspects of your complex intervention. And I'll share an example with you in a moment. And then it's essentially saying, like, is this working, or do we need to tweak this in an ongoing way? So this idea comes from sort of like agile, like business management. It's like, so you're thinking on your feet and you're nimble, and you're constantly sort of tweaking what you're doing, continually orienting yourself toward the optimal way, or to use that phrase, toward the least bad way of doing whatever it is that you're doing. And so in theory, at least, and indeed in practice, in many cases, this thing can't go wrong, because you're starting with the best bet at the outset, but you're recognizing that what you think is the vehicle that's going to get you from A to B actually might look very different 3 years from now, but you're going to be making evidence-informed decisions all the way along the way. And so you're continually orienting yourself toward that least bad formulation. And so that's what we're doing here. And so there's 3 areas to focus on. Baseline, sorry, I'll just animate this whole slide. Baseline, so you can get a rich picture of what's going on currently, and you'll have something to compare back to later on. Impact, so that you can collect things post-intervention or at regular intervals throughout the implementation period to enable you to evaluate the extent to which different aspects of things are working. And side effects, as I say, to capture those undesirable consequences, which are so often there lurking in the shadows. And therefore, we have 3 types of research question. We've got baseline research questions, and this is essentially a divergent phase. This is outward-looking stuff where we're trying to get a sense of what's happening currently. And this can be quantitative. So let's say your initiative is around homework. You might start by asking, to what extent do teachers set homework at the moment? To what extent is it marked? To what extent do the kids hand it in? And so on. Or it can be qualitative, right? What do the teachers say about homework? What do kids say about it? What kinds of homework do kids say that they get the most from? So you can use different types of data collection to get a rich picture of what's going on at baseline. Then after you've done this baseline, you might come up with a particular idea. You're going to use a homework menu, right? So that kids can sort of choose things that they think are going to be most useful to them. And so you might come up with an impact question, which is something like, to what extent does this homework menu idea, implemented every term for the next year, improve, engagement and improve outcomes in literacy, or whatever it is that you're trying to do among, year 8 kids, right? Or whatever it is that you're trying to do. So at this point, it's more convergent. You're coming together and having a much more focused, look at whatever it is that you're trying to do. And then there you go, there's that example. And then there's the side effect question. Has the introduction of this homework menu led to any undesirable or any unintended consequences, right? So let's look at an example. There's a whole school behavior initiative, and they've come up with a new set of behavior rules. There's a new duty rota for break and lunch times and before and after school. There's a new way of recording incidents of misbehavior. There's a new detention policy, and they've got a peer mentoring program to promote like positive relationships and to address friendship issues, say, right? And so you start with your baseline question, which will be different in each case. To what extent do the kids know these new rules when you've just introduced them? Where do the most common behavior incidents happen with regard to informing your duty rota, for example? I'm not going to read all of these out. It's really just to illustrate the approach. Then you collect baseline data, and the kind of data that you collect really depends on what it is that you're trying to find out. And in this case, in this example school, they're implementing this thing starting in September. And so they're doing all this baseline data collection in the summer term. And then there's the evaluative research questions, and they're both impact ones and side effect ones. I'll just give you a moment to glance down the screen to look at some examples. You get the idea. Very similar, sort of like using the same format. To what extent does X improve Y is the impact formula, and has X caused any unintentional problems is the side effects problem question. And then again, you think about, you know, what kind of data is going to shine a light on that question, and when are you going to do this? And at this point, we spread this evenly as far as we can throughout the school year, so that there's no, and we avoid, you know, report writing and parents' evenings and so on, so that we can minimize the impact on workload across the year, and also disseminate it so that different people are collecting different types of data, so it doesn't all just fall on one person. So that's an example of what this sort of mixed methods approach to evaluating different elements of a complex intervention looks like. So that's the monitoring and evaluation piece. There's a lot more to it. I'm giving you sort of a slightly truncated version of each of these, just so that we can get through it because of the time allowance. But yeah, and then briefly, I'll talk about pivot or persevere, and then we'll open this thing up for you to ask any questions about the remaining chapters. So pivot or persevere meetings, that's this idea that the implementation plan sets the course. That's really important to have a good plan, but also, as it says in the EEF guidance, like you need to expect bumps in the road. Like reality will always throw curveballs at you. Like it just always will, whatever metaphor you want to use. So change is a dynamic process that evolves over time, and you need to be nimble and agile and quick on your feet and what have you. Pivot or persevere meetings, therefore, help us to avoid these two common problems that emerge. One is the weather vane trap, this idea of changing too quickly. There's an implementation dip often, right? When you start doing something new, there's often a little bit of a blip first. People sort of just like trying to get their head around it. They're a bit overwhelmed. And sometimes when you hit that dip, people go, oh God, the policy's not working, and they just revert to type. And so you don't want to do that. You don't want to be a weather vane and just change your decision-making policies too easily. But likewise, you don't want to be falling into the sunk cost fallacy either, where you persevere for too long. And the big idea, this idea, pivot or persevere, really comes from a very influential business book called the Lean Startup, I think it's called, by Eric Ries, who writes in his chapter on pivot or persevere, there is no bigger destroyer of creative potential than the misguided decision to persevere. And I'm sure that we can all think of examples of where individually or in professional settings, this problem recurs many, many times. And there's no magic formula for how to walk this tightrope between these two problems. It's an ongoing conversation, basically. It's an ongoing process. And so to evaluate your complex intervention, you recall that idea of the complex intervention, this idea that there's many bricks in the wall. But each element, you should have a theory of action statement. When we built that complex intervention, you have a theory of action statement that says, like, when we implement this aspect of the intervention, Y will happen because Z. So you have this like reasoning mechanism. We think that X will happen. So when we do X, Y will happen because Z. And that's basically a prediction that you can now test as the data comes in. So as the data comes in, you have these regular pivot or persevere meetings where the whole vertical slice team reassembles. You look at the data and you think, you know, is this prediction coming true or not? Using those three levels of data collection, baseline, impact, and side effects. And there's a thing called a PDSA cycle, plan, do, study, act. So that when you're actually implementing the plan. You implement a thing. You plan to do X. You do a thing, and then you evaluate the impact of that thing, and then you figure out what to do next. And this whole process essentially becomes a series of very rapid PDSA cycles. So there's one big overarching implementation plan, and then there's lots of little mini improvement cycles going on throughout the implementation period. And so, yeah, that's that. And depending on whether the data supports your prediction, you can figure out whether you're going to persevere with that thing or whether you need to tweak it. And yeah, you get the idea. So pivot or persevere is dead important. Right, at this point, that red dot is my key to press the home button. And now we can open this up for anybody to ask any questions about if there are any other aspects of this toolkit. Are there any of these other titles that grab your attention, that you want to know more about, that you're unsure about? Please feel free to either unmute yourself and ask using your actual voice, or to stick it in the chat box. I'll give you a moment to look across the screen and have a think. Some excellent questions there as well. I'll come back to those when we do the Q&A bit at the end. Any requests? Oh, the metaphors one. Yeah, okay. We can look at that. That's in a way, it's sort of the most interesting chapter in some sense, because it's really unlike all the others. But it's dead important, the language that we use. Which have been hardest for teams? Is that, Tracy, is that like which of these chapters is hardest? Yes. Okay, thank you. Yeah. I mean, in my experience, monitoring and evaluation, is there like, well, so there's two things: monitoring and evaluation and communications planning. Like, these are two things that are just hugely overlooked. And monitoring and evaluation, it's sort of like, it's not often in, like, lots of the work that Mark and I do is around practitioner inquiry, action research type stuff. And teachers often really struggle with that. They struggle to write a research question, and then when they come up with one, they struggle to come up with ways of collecting data that will actually test whether it's, you know, verifiable or not. They can get there in the end, but it's a long journey. That it's not something that comes naturally to many people, to essentially becoming a social scientist. That's often not in people's skill sets, and so it takes a while to get your head around that one. And yeah, comms planning, like, is so widely used in other fields, in politics, in charities, in business. Comms plans are just like second to what we're going to say, everyday occurrences anyway. And they're really rare in schools. Like senior teams that I speak with often say, well, that's a no-brainer. Why don't we do that? And essentially, comms planning is a way of making sure that throughout that implementation period, that you're making sure that all the different audiences, all the different groups of people are being communicated with through different channels by different people. So it's not just like, the senior leader who's in charge of teaching and learning, who gets up to talk about the new feedback initiative every time there's a staff briefing, where before they've even drawn breath, everyone knows that they're going to talk about the feedback thing because that's their project that they're doing for their MPQ or whatever. Like, they know that, we start to see what we call a chorus of voices, surprising people, talking to different groups through different channels, as I say, spread across the implementation period. And you just calendar it, and you make a communications plan, and you set alarms to go off in your calendar to remind you, okay, it's December, we're going to do a mail shot to parents. It's March, we're going to, ask the TAs what they think about what's going on. And so really, really useful to have a communications plan. Yeah, right. Yeah, I would avoid that. So Nika asked a question. We're getting into Q&A a little bit here. What if people are trying to implement several things simultaneously? Often people say that. They often say, oh, this is great. We want to do 3 at once. Like, definitely don't do that. Start with one, because you learn such a lot through the process of doing it about what works for you in your particular context at this particular point in time. And so just do one. It's just still a huge chunk of time. Right. Thank you, Roger, for using the capital letter question system. I appreciate that. I'm going to come back to your questions first because you're top of the class for doing that. Thank you. Right. Let's look at metaphors for change, seen as Mark requested it. This is a really interesting chapter. And so this is essentially about like recognizing the importance of metaphors, right? Like the language that we use to describe change is very important in shaping what people think about it. And people often use metaphors to describe the process of change, and they can help people to understand the process of change and to chart progress over time. But some metaphors are more useful than others. And so in this chapter, we consider 7 common metaphors for change and 4 metaphors that are like associated with change, many of which I've already used in this session. And so here are the 7 metaphors. There's a little guessing game here. Can anyone guess? Type into the chat box or just shout out if you want to unmute yourself. Which of these metaphors could you put a name to? Thank you. We've got launch. We have a route map. Bridge. I'm guessing M is just a typo, Tony. Thread, yeah, the golden thread, common thread, yeah, the gold. I couldn't find a golden icon, so yeah, common thread, yeah, cycles, yeah, there you go. So we've got launch, the flight path, the bridge, the common thread, the cycle, the map, and the journey. There we go. Brilliant. Well done. So the launch, right? So there's like fors and against for each of them. The launch sounds exciting, doesn't it? A rocket launch. Whoa! Let's hold a launch event, and like I say, we'll have a logo and we'll put some sandwiches out and what have you. There's a sense of adventure, of journeying into the unknown. You know, people like a launch, but a launch is actually a really bad metaphor for change because it presents change as like a one-off event, doesn't it? We'll do a launch and the rocket's gone, and then it's like, wow. And there's also danger there, right? Like rockets don't always return safely. You know, launches. I would caution against using launch. The flight path is often used these days. This is like presenting change as a process and also something that it's difficult to do, right? Like, you know, it's quite hard, aviation. There's a sense of responsibility of like keeping the passengers safe, you know, keeping the kids safe. So there's some things in favor of this metaphor, but against it, it sort of presents the change process as something that's potentially perilous, right? That plane might not land where you want it to, or it might not even land at all. It might run out of fuel in midair. So again, you know, I think I would be cautious about using the flight path. The bridge is nice. It takes you safely across the void, safely across that implementation dip to the promised land. That would be nice, wouldn't it? But again, it's like a bridge is static, isn't it? Like once you build a bridge, it's just there, isn't it? It remains unchanging and unresponsive, and it's not that agile, dynamic thing that we need to describe this agile, dynamic process. The golden thread. This came. I first saw this in a DCSF document, the old name for the DFE, where a primary teacher said, "This is all very well, but what's the golden thread? Show me how it all connects. How the thread that runs through from analysis of data to action that actually makes a difference to kids' lives." You know, it's a really good point. And the thread is nice. It makes clear that there's a through line from leadership through to student outcomes. This idea that change has real world consequences, that there are real lives at the end of this process, that it's not just sort of abstract. But again, I think this is better suited to explaining how different aspects of school life connect, really, rather than describing a process of change. Like you pull at a thread, don't you? But then everything sort of untangles, and it's not necessarily a good metaphor. The cycle, is very common, isn't it? We talk about this all the time with action research cycles. This makes clear that improvement is often a cyclical process, and those PDSA cycles that I mentioned earlier, they are cyclical, and that any end point is sort of the beginning of the next part of the process. And it's well suited to some things. This idea of the professional development cycle, of annual cycles of improvement and review and so on, it can be useful. But cycles, you know, if you've got a clear destination in mind, a cycle just might make you feel like you're going around in circles, right? Like a new behavior policy. You don't want to just be having the constant cycle of like how to improve behavior. You want to actually improve behavior and stay there. The roadmap, sort of similar to the flight path, captures this idea that change is a process of getting from A to B. There are many possible routes, that the destination may change should you get a better offer, you know, so there's a bit of sort of agility in here. But against, you know, a bit like bridges, maps are static, and it's a tool really, isn't it? It's a tool that can help you plan and track your journey, but it doesn't actually take you from A to B. And then the journey, which is my favorite one. As you can see, there are many more reasons in the 4 list here. I'll give you a moment to glance down the screen. But again, in the against column, you know, depends on the type of vehicle, doesn't it? Like cars are small, buses have got fixed routes often, maybe a coach journey, but is this, you know, as with all metaphors, you can take these things too far, can't you? And then there's these 4 metaphors associated with change. We have bumps in the road, the implementation dip I mentioned earlier, glass box versus black box, and targets. Is it targets? I think the last one's targets. So this idea of bumps in the road, that quote comes from the EF guidance. Let's give you a moment to look at that. Expect setbacks. They are natural features. The implementation dip. This is an interesting one. It's a useful one to use. So you've got like your current outcomes, and then you've got desired outcomes, and you recognize that you're going to go through this dip. But then you can say, well, okay, so how can we manage people's expectations through this dip? How can we reduce the depth of the dip? How can we shorten the length of the dip? What kinds of professional learning happen within this dip? And what kinds of professional development activities help people to come out the other side of that dip? So the dip is quite a useful thing to describe the process of change. And transparency, I think, is so important. This is really overlooked. It makes it so much more likely that people will come with you on the journey. It needs to be mechanized, this thing. It shouldn't be occasional or an afterthought. It should be routine, like sharing meeting minutes, sharing data. This should be something that happens routinely, and it needs to be made explicit throughout the journey. This is where we're going. These are our concerns. Here's how you can get involved if you want to help, and so on. And this really, I think, there's 2 major reasons why the vertical slice team approach helps people to implement stuff more effectively. One is that you just get better policy, as we've seen, because you've looked at this through multiple lenses and you've looked at it from every angle. And secondly, transparency. Like, people can see into this team, they can see that they're represented on this change team, that there is somebody like them with whom they can interact throughout the change process. And so you bring people with you. Like, transparency is so key, because you bring people with you on this journey and you unleash all of this sort of latent potential that rests within them, the sort of cognitive surplus, if you like, or the enthusiasm surplus, the energy surplus that resides within a teaching population. If you bring them with you on the journey, so that they're not just in a compliance mindset, but they're actually thinking, right, how can I play my role here in part of this transparent process that we're all a part of? You just unleash all of this sort of human capital, and it just makes your life so much easier, makes it so much more likely that your thing will work. And so transparency is the I beg your pardon. The last one is refinement, not target setting. I thought that wasn't quite right. This is the lovely quote from Dylan William, who says that this is summed up neatly by the phrase "ready, fire, aim," right? Which is like, at some point you just need to like get on with it, and you recognize that your plan is just that. It's a plan, and you're going to, you know, have to adjust your target as time goes on. And so at some point, like, just start doing stuff and then collect data and adjust your crosshairs, if you like, another unpleasant metaphor, as time goes on. So that's the fourth one. And so, yeah, in summary, think carefully about language. It's helpful to think of the implementation process as a journey. Manage people's expectations, make clear that there may be a dip or bumps in the road, be transparent at every stage, ready, fire, aim, and build something with a steering wheel and a reverse gear, not a space rocket. So that's metaphors for change. So there's a thing I'd really like to ask people, if there's no other requests from this, from the toolkit, and as I say, I'm happy to stay on. I have a problem with with naming stuff, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as people who know, you know, a bit about this now. So currently, the course is called Implementation Science for Schools, right? And the advantage of that is that it's really the most accurate description of what this thing is. Implementation science is a thing. It's usually a health thing. And this is implementation science for schools. And so it's, you know, it does what it says on the tin, and the word of implementation is in the air, you know, the implementation strand of the new MPQ frameworks and so on, and the implementation guidance that the EEF did. So, you know, it's hooking onto that wagon, if you like. The disadvantage being that some people have told me that when they glance at that, they just think that it's about science. They see the word science and they just think, oh, that's not for me. And therefore they dismiss it. And that's actually quite an annoying problem because a few people have said it. So with that in mind, the website currently is called Implementing School Improvement. And the advantage of that is that it solves this science problem. And it also makes clear that the program is about improvement and not just change. There's that brilliant book that I'm reading at the moment by Vivian Robinson, Reduce Change to Increase Improvement. She talks about, you know, like change can go bad, right, as well. So you need to focus on improvement rather than just change. And so it makes it clear that it's about that. The disadvantage is that it's just a bit boring, isn't it? Like implementing school improvement. And, you know, it just sounds a bit, I don't know, it's not really where it's at. And then the book, there's someone mentioned I'm writing this book, and at the moment it's called Making Change Stick. And actually there's a strap line. It's Making Change Stick, the art and science of implementing school improvement. And so that's less of a problem because it includes, the strapline includes implementation, includes the idea of improvement. It's snappier than the other two, but the disadvantage is that it's about change rather than improvement or implementation. So at the moment, I've got 3 different things and they've all got different names. And so my 2 questions are, number 1, do you think that these things should all have the same name? And if so, which one? And secondly, if not, how do you think I should divide the names? For example, should we call the book Making Change Stick and then call the course one of the other 2 things? Does anybody have any opinion on this? Help me out in my naming pickle.
Top of the head suggestion, James?
Yeah, go on, Roger.
Well, I like the strapline on the book. Could you reverse the process for the course and call it something like Implementation for Schools, Making Change Stick? In other words, have a strapline for the course, but the other way around.
Oh, right. Yeah, okay. And maybe take, yeah, you're right. Maybe take science out, because that gets rid of the science problem. Implementation for schools.
Yeah.
Implementation for schools, making change stick. Oh, I like that. Yeah, interesting. Thank you. Making improvement stick. Thanks, Andy. Yeah. Becky's agreeing with Roger. Yeah, right. Strap lines are useful, aren't they? Because they just allow you to say more stuff.
and importantly, to say it in a different way. I think that is, you know, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Please continue to. I know, Stan. That's a good point. Like, there's something that's fundamentally like counterintuitive about change and stickiness, isn't there? It's a good point. But it's sort of, it's a bit, it's still, I don't know, it's the least boring one, isn't it? Anyway, thanks for that. I just wanted to get your thoughts on it. If you have any further thoughts on it, please stick them in the chat box. I'll look at those later. And so just very briefly, so at the moment, as I say, the website is called implementingschoolimprovement.com. I'll just stick that in the chat window if you want to have a look at that. So on this website, there's some video testimonials of people who've been through the process. There's a free 10-part taster course, which is there's about the 10 videos. It adds up to about an hour of time. There's a full course as well, which is paid, and there's a scale of fees. So we've got a different levels of subscriptions for different sizes of organizations, and we're running a discount. So there's a 15% discount for before next Friday, a week tomorrow. If you want to take advantage of that offer, you can email that email address, hello@rethinking-ed.org, and quote ISS Xmas, and that's the ISS Xmas deal. Oh, Jeff has done, thank you, Jeff. Yeah, Jeff has done the free one and he liked it. So that's getting the thumbs up from Jeff. And people, the free one is essentially I did this a face-to-face training session and filmed it. So the free course is essentially me just like, you know, on camera talking through slides. The paid one is this massive slide deck that I've been working through today, and it's much more sort of you know, it's cleaner. I think it's a cleaner way to access the information. So the free course isn't that much of a taster of what the paid one looks like, but there is a free episode in the free one that gives you a sense of what's in the paid one. Right. Anyway, so we have a little bit of time now for any questions, and I'll skirt back up through. I'm going to pick out your ones, Roger, first for using the capital questions. There we are. And then Tony did the same. Thank you, Tony. And if anyone else has got any questions, if you've already asked them, it would be really helpful if you'd repost it again with the capital question so that I can just see them at the bottom of the list. So yeah, question one of Roger's: how much of a tick list does the typical implementation plan become? Absolutely, it becomes a tick list. So that's the thing. So the implementation planning template, let's say there's 30 pages, and it's sort of looking at things like resourcing and some of the ideas that we've seen in here about, you know, like diffusion of innovation, thinking about strategies to address different groups of people, and contingency planning. And so it's a very sort of complicated document in some sense. And then in chapter, whatever it is, chapter 21, I think, we translate that plan into essentially a to-do list, a project management tool, whether that's a to-do list or a checklist or a Gantt chart or whatever tool it is that you want to use. And you couple that up with a calendar so that you spread it across a timeline so that you make sure that there's no huge amounts of impact on workload. And yeah, it basically, it becomes a checklist thing. But bearing in mind that you're building in those pivot or persevere meetings where you're not just following the dead-eyed gaze of like your 2-year-old plan, you know, like you're sort of adapting, like in that checklist is think about what you're doing now, as well as just do what you think, you know, what you thought 2 years ago. So yeah, I hope that answers that question. How easy do schools typically find it to set up and sustain vertical slice teams? Yeah, that's a good question. It's like one of the problems is staff turnover, right? Like we're talking about a 3 to 5 year plan, and often, you know, some schools have got really high rates of staff turnover. And we have a sort of thought experiment that we run when we first assemble the vertical slice team, and we say, you know, like imagine that 50% of the teachers leave the school next summer, and then the following year the other 50% leave. So 2 years from now, there's nobody here that's here now. What could we do? What plans can we put into our implementation plan to make sure that the show is still on the road 2 years from now, even though 100% of the staff has changed? And it's a bit of a ridiculous, you know, thought experiment, but it really helps people to think through like things like onboarding, right? So that how are we going to get people up to speed with the process so that when people inevitably leave people will inevitably leave over a 3 to 5 year period, but you replace them really quickly. And so when schools have gone through that process and they've taken that aspect seriously, so that they've got a plan or a ready-made plan, and they've, often it could be just, go and do this online course, or we've made a little sort of video package for somebody who's new to the school to just get them up to speed with this change initiative, if they're just new to the school, but they're not new to the vertical slice. And so it depends is the answer. How easy is it to set them up? They're very, very, schools are really keen to set them up, in my experience. It's a fertile idea people just like to grab. It's definitely how the second part of that is harder to sustain. But when they take the time to make the plans to make it so that when it starts to fall apart, it just automatically repairs itself because the plan is in place and just gets enacted, then it works.
Can I just ask a supplementary, James?
Yeah.
And it's the very practical one. We all know how busy teachers are and how difficult it is to get people, almost in one place. And I suppose on a regular basis, it's senior leaders who meet, for their whatever it is, weekly or if you've got a vertical slice team operating not in parallel, but side by side with that sort of meeting, meetings take time, they consume people's energy and so on. So that would be more my concern at the very ground level, how much time and energy people have for that, ideal though it is. Clearly.
Yeah. I mean, there's, like I said before, there's no way to sugarcoat that pill.
No.
And, it takes time. But I don't think that we can afford to not do it in that way, because look at the 80 to 90% failure rate and the consequent, shortfalls in outcomes in terms of whatever it is that you're trying to achieve to improve people's lives, to improve their, learning, to improve their mental health, whatever it is. If we're not putting the time in and doing those hard yards early on, then, we're not going to, what's that phrase? If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. There is a serious time commitment. 24 hours of meeting time is huge. Totally agree. And that probably makes this quite a hard sell, but I'm not going to, some people say, could you not just do an introductory course of this, just do a little one to give people a shallow on-ramp. And I don't want to do that because I don't think it will work. And I don't want to give people the false dawn, if you like, that they think, oh, I'll do this little introductory course and we'll implement something off the back of that. It won't work because they've not looked at all of these other really important ideas. And so, but the good news, I think, is that once you've made that investment, that time investment, then you don't have to do that. It doesn't take that long the second and third and fourth time you do it. You have people who are upskilled and you build the leadership capacity within your school. It also, in my experience, really helps. This is an informal finding, but people feel very motivated by taking part in teams like this, and they want to stay at a school where their voice is valued in this way. And so it really helps with teacher retention, with building leadership capacity, and it's a thing that gives and gives. Right. So there's a question from Tony. I'm particularly taken by the vertical slice team. What leadership style approaches are needed to allow this to happen effectively? That's a really good question. I mean, there's definitely, as I said before, there are some, that sort of my way or the highway, top down sort of, very dictatorial way of leading from the top on down doesn't lend itself to this. And there has to be willingness on the behalf of a senior leader to do that. But when I've seen this done really well, it's sort of devolved. So it's not the head teacher who's sort of involved in this. They're sort of line managing their senior leaders. And it's essentially the senior leaders who are operating this. And if they have, there's a really lovely quote by Elaine Long, who we heard from earlier, who took part in that first one. She talks about the need to be anti-fragile, right? To be willing to open up your ideas and your policy ideas to public scrutiny, essentially, and be willing to be argued down, and be willing to admit that you actually hadn't really thought something through completely well. And if somebody's insecure in themselves as a leader, if some people, aren't willing to go down that route, then yeah, it's not going to work with them. But you know, one of the things in this toolkit is this idea of the diffusion of innovations, where I'll just nip to that one quickly. This idea that you have different types of people, right? Innovators, early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, and then people who are resistant to change. And the question then is, who are the teachers, who are the head teachers and school leaders who are ripe for this at the moment? Who's, you know, got a stable staff body, retentions at a reasonable level, who's in an Ofsted window, right? So it doesn't look like Ofsted are going to come and just change the game in 6 months' time and make everyone shift their focus. You know, we can identify people who are good at this, who are ready for it rather, and then we can develop many more case studies. And then we'll reach that magical tipping point where this tips into the early majority. And at that point, people will be talking about this as a new way of doing things that actually brings about results. And then at that point, it's a lot easier to have that conversation with those resistors, with the people who don't like the look of this approach, because everybody wants to improve outcomes, right? Like this whole thing really connects to moral purpose, and those resistant leaders still have a strong sense of moral purpose that underpins their desire to do that very, very difficult, challenging, stressful job. And if they can be persuaded that this is the best way to improve outcomes, the reason that they got into this game in the first place, then, you know, we're going to be winning. Right, let me go to the next questions. Sorry, I hope that answers your question, Tony. I don't know, I didn't go into sort of all the different leadership styles, but Donald, how do you address how to evaluate your school's capacity for change initiatives? Yeah, absolutely. So that sort of comes early on in the role of leaders. There's a chapter called The Role of Leaders, and it's about, like, you know, recognizing that this is a very time-consuming process, making a really informed decision. Is this the right thing at this point in time? Or is it something that maybe for a year or two when you've addressed some other issues? And so absolutely, yeah, that's very much addressed within that chapter. Making sure that there's a shared vision, time commitments, alignment. Yeah, absolutely. Andy, how do you deal with external constraints, costs, or external policymakers who can effectively stifle changes proposed by the vertical slice team? That's a great question. And it's one of those sort of like where the rubber hits the road type issues, isn't it? Like you start on this journey with the best of intentions, and then, you know, you run into problems. I mean, with regard to costs, I don't think that, I mean, so obviously there's like the full course of this is a paid thing, whether it's the online version or if you do the facilitated version. So there's a cost associated with that. But beyond that, I don't think that it's you know, necessarily a hugely cost-effective thing to do, and finances are a big part of the implementation planning process, right? And so we build into, you know, there's budgeting built into the implementation plan, and so it's one of those pre-mortem issues, I think, that you can try to anticipate as far as you can in advance. External policymakers who can stifle changes proposed by the vertical slice team. Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question, isn't it? I mean, you know, I think that it's essentially a form of quite courageous leadership to go down this route, that you're going to be doing something that you think is right rather than something that you think is sort of, you know, according to the policy du jour. It's a difficult thing. I mean, there's no easy answer to that. You deal with it when it happens. I'm a little bit stumped by that question for now, I must admit. It's a without, I guess you'd have to look at a hard example of what sort of thing you mean. I don't know if you could maybe put some flesh on that, Andy. Did you have something in mind that you? I'll go to another question and see if you can come up with sort of an example, because it's hard to answer in the abstract, that one. Jeff, the mighty community and the vision of moving that forward. Yeah, absolutely. I met with Becky Carlson, who I think has left the call now. She she runs a really successful two online communities using Mighty Networks, and I met with her this week to talk about a strategy for how to grow the community and how to keep it going. And so, like, I finished making this online course in June, and then I ran this massive conference in September, the Rethinking Education conference, and that took all my time for months. And then it's basically taken like 2 months since then to just get on top of the massive pile of stuff that had piled up alongside the conference. And so the online community has sort of been a little bit neglected for the last 6 months or so, but we have plans to get it going in the new year. And so there'll be regular Q&As, there'll be blogs, there'll be, like, as I write the book, I'll be sharing excerpts and asking for feedback on it and so on. And so, and as more people come into the community, I'm talking with some really interesting organizations at the moment about like bulk participation in this process. And the more people that come into the community, it'll really help it to spark into life.
James, I'd be very happy to be as much or as little part of that as you go forward with it. I think it's great, and I'm really interested in it. Oh,
thanks, Jeff. Cheers, man. I really appreciate your positive feedback throughout this process. And yeah, brilliant. I will definitely call on you on that support for sure. Thank you.
Great.
Nicola, hi Nicola, nice to see you. I wanted to ask about the relationship of this to Vivian Robinson's work. Having read her books, I can see some similarities in some areas, definitely. Yeah, there's so that book about reduce change to increase improvement is very much about theory engagement, and there are lots of areas of overlap. We talk a lot about the theories of change and theories of action early on when we, that theory of action statement, that sort of mechanism of action. When we implement X, Y will happen because Z. And then also later on, so it's there at the foundations of this process. We're thinking that we're engaging with this on a theoretical level. And then when we're doing later on in that Pivot or Persevere chapter, there's a thing that Robinson takes, I think it's from Argyris and Sean, that idea of an espoused theory versus a theory in action. Like, what do people say they think is happening and what's actually happening on the ground? And how can you minimize the gap between those two things? And we go into that in more detail in that Pivot or Persevere chapter. So I know you're working your way through the toolkit at the moment, aren't you? You've probably not got to that bit yet because it's near the end. But yeah, we do talk about those ideas. Thank you, Roger. The vertical slice team idea, I came across it. So there's an implementation hub. What's it called? The AI. I don't know if Jonathan Sharples is still on the call. There's an AI hub, something. It's like this is active implementation hub. I think it's US based, mainly health based stuff. And that was where I first came across the vertical, but they call it something slightly different. They call it like zones of transformation or something, transformation zones. But essentially, they're talking about a cross section through the health system where they're talking about like policymakers and government officials and health coordinators in different states and hospital managers. So they're looking at it, through a much wider thing than just within an organization. And so it's sort of half my brainwave, I suppose, in that I've adapted that idea into, just having these cross-sectional teams working within schools. That I hadn't seen done in that way before.
Good. Well done, James.
Oh, thank you. Sometimes, yeah, it's just one of those ideas. And earlier this year, I did a TED talk, which was it's a slight aside to this, but it was essentially saying we should have vertical slice politics, right? Instead of the health system run by one cabinet minister who's got no experience in health usually, why don't we have a vertical slice team of doctors and nurses, senior doctors and nurses, junior doctors and nurses, hospital administrators, health researchers and health economists, patients, all the people who are affected by people in social care. Like, would we have a crisis in social care if there was somebody living in social care making decisions in the Department for Health and Social Care? Probably not. And so this idea extends far beyond, education. Education today, tomorrow the world. I'll just see. I know we've gone a bit over time. I'll just see if there's any more. There's been a few extra comments. Oh, Derry's on the call. Hi, Derry. Collecting examples of the implementation of the 20% directed curriculum time. Yeah, brilliant. I'm going to get in touch with you soon, Derry. I'm going to do a book club thing for your book. Derry's coming on the on the podcast soon, on the Rethinking Education podcast. He's got an excellent book called Another Way is Possible, Becoming a Democratic Teacher in a State School. And we're going to do a book club about that. And then I'll speak to you on the podcast in the new year. I'll be in touch soon.
Great.
Yeah, Andy, thank you. Brave leadership. Yeah, I mean, it is a big ask. It's easier said than done. And I sometimes find, I know lots of people use that phrase, and I've used it myself in the past, but it feels a bit like demeaning to school leaders. As though you're sort of calling them timid or something, that you're saying that they are somehow not brave or not courageous enough, and there's something that's a bit problematic, or even a lot problematic, about that language. And yet it's, there's something there, isn't there? Like you sort of have to have the courage of your convictions, I suppose, and to go down a path and pursue it. But it's really hard to do when your job's on the line. And we have this very sort of like football manager approach to, in some academy chains, for example, like hiring and firing heads because they've had a bad season. It is a big ask. It's a hard thing to do. I'm not sure if it's quite the right language, but yeah, you have to definitely, it's a bold move, I think, to go down this route.
James, can I jump in?
Yeah, please do.
It reminds me of some projects that I've been involved with community budgeting. There's an EU Erasmus project bringing schools together from Portugal, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Poland, looking at community budgeting and creating vertical slice groups. I've never heard it called that before, but it reminds me of citizens' juries. I mean, I was involved in one in Gdansk, where the mayor of Gdansk said he would actually find the funding for a new school if a citizens' jury came together and really thrashed the issue out and could come up with a scheme that he regarded as credible. Unfortunately, he was assassinated shortly afterwards, so it never actually happened. But it did bring vertical slices together that very much included young people, which is obviously something I would want to see. Hard to imagine how you could have a project to implement change in a school that didn't affect students, and therefore it's hard to imagine a project that should not involve them in the vertical slicing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing that people have struggled with. To go back to Roger's question about sustaining vertical slices and so on, I know that I see there are not as many vertical slices with students in or parents as I would like to see. I think that people feel a little bit like sort of defensive or a bit nervous about lifting up the hood and sort of, like allowing the consumers, if you like, the kids and the parents into the process. That also is a very bold move to go down. You have to be very confident in yourself, I think, to do that.
James, it was crucial. Your medical examples all seem to involve patients.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So what's the difference?
Absolutely. I agree. It's just, I think that it's something that people struggle with, but yeah. And yeah, so like you're talking about citizens' juries or citizens' assemblies, and that's a very similar idea. But I think that the difference is that those things it's essentially a consultation exercise. And often they make really good recommendations, citizens' assemblies, that are then roundly ignored by people for political reasons. And we just go back around the same old track. And so, yeah, but it feels like it's such a good idea. And my hope for this is that it's one of those ideas that it seems so good, not just in terms of school, like leading change in schools, but that vertical slice politics idea. It's like, I don't think we're going to get the lid back on that. Like, it just seems like it's so obviously what needs to happen. The world is not being well run by this very small, essentially self-selecting group of people. And we know that representative, diverse teams make better decisions. And so it feels like it's just a matter of time before that happens. But how we get from here to there, the good news is that we have implementation science on our side, right? So we just need to make a plan. And in fact, that's kind of what's happening at the moment. And we're working on these ideas, working with this group, the Educators Alliance, to try to sort of to shape policy and to try to influence policy going into the next election. Because, you know, looks like change might be on the horizon there. So who knows? We'll see how this thing plays out. But yeah, thank you for your point, Derry. I agree completely. Okay, so it's 5:45, so we've overrun a little. I'm very happy to stay on if anyone has any further questions or if there's anything else in the toolkit that you'd like to know. Or I'm happy to sign off if you want to go and enjoy your evenings.
It's been great, James. Thank you very much.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Cheers. Nice to see you, Derry. And as I say, I'll be in touch soon.
Thank you very much, James. Excellent. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Cheers, Jeff.
See you. See you all.
Bye, James.
Cheerio.
I love coming on to your sessions because it just does give me hope that we're not just waiting for something to happen. It's about building something completely different. And that word compelling, that's what's important, I think. So brilliant. Keep going.
Thanks, Tony. Thank you. I appreciate that. Cheers. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening.